We're about to take a stroll together through a temple complex located in Samos, a Greek island not far from the coast of Turkey. This will be a stroll not only through the temple, and I'll explain to you what we're looking at as we walk along, but it's also a stroll through time and development of consciousness, and I'll explain that as we go along. So, what you're looking at now is the Sacred Way. This is practically all that remains of the Sacred Way from this temple. It led from the old city of Samos, now called Pythagoreia, and people who wanted to visit the Hera temple, that's where we're going into now, would normally dock their boats there and then walk the 6-kilometer way, basically to prepare them for a visit to this great temple. There are other sacred ways that we know about, including one that leads to Ephesus, which is you're not able to walk it these days, and another one, of course, in Didma, which leads from the great city of Malay, which led people to the Apollo temple, which you can partly see today. And now as we enter deeper and deeper into the temple, I want to also share with you something very personal. This film was made in September of 2022. I made 2 visits to Samos, and both times I visited this temple. It's not far from Pythagoreia these days, so you can get there in about 10-15 minutes. And the reason I came here again was because this is maybe the 4th visit I've made to Samos, and the first visit I made was about 4 or 5 years ago, because I wanted to make peace with the goddess Hera. Why do I say that? Well, the Hera that most of us know was not a very nice goddess. She was married to Zeus, the great god of the 12 gods of the great of Mount Olympus, and she was described to be somewhat jealous and revengeful. And I developed a very important relationship about 6 years ago with the great Anatolian goddess Artemis from Ephesus. And for me that was quite liberating, because as a teacher of Christianity, I had a deep yearning to look into more other roots of Christianity, including the Hellenic traditions and Roman traditions, and also the old Egyptian traditions. And the story with Artemis is that she is a twin to Apollo. And Leto, who's one of the Titans, one of the original gods that belonged to the Greek Hellenic system, mythology, became impregnated by Zeus before his marriage to Hera. And she was deep into her pregnancy, either in Ephesus and having birth pains. Some people say that it belongs to Delos, an incredible island not far from Athens, an island of the gods. It doesn't matter. And as Hera caught wind of the pregnancy, she wanted to actually eliminate Leto and probably the twins. And she didn't manage for one reason or the other. So the twins were born, Apollo and Artemis, and Leto was also kept in safety. And so I decided, because of my newfound adoration for Artemis, that I would come and make peace with Hera. And that's why I've been here to this temple a number of times in order to do that. And also at the beginning of September, I was there because I was en route to Patmos, the island of Patmos, which is about an hour away from, with a ferry, or 3 hours, depending which ferry you catch, to the island of Patmos to teach a week-long course where we go into the Book of Revelations as a healing method. That's what I do on Patmos. I've been doing it for 7 years. And I had a whole different experience this time when I went there. Now we're going to start entering the temple complex. I realized that I had been duped by some early forms of fake news, as it were. In as much as if we look at this temple here that we're about to enter, and now you're going to see also on your right some of the copies of the original statues found there. And these statues are mammoth, including one of Hera, which is now in the Samos Museum in Samos City, which is another city today. You can see it. It's a beautifully carved stone of Hera, very fine. And you know, I know that we owe a lot to Homer and to other great pre-Greek philosophers and writers who wrote a lot about the Greek gods, including what we find in the Iliad and the Odyssey and other sources. And these are sacred scriptures for the Greeks. They're like for us what we call the New Testament or the Old Testament if you're Christian. And you pretty much take them for their word because, first of all, according to their age, written 800 years before the Christian era, and also because of their authenticity. But there was an agenda. Now we're walking more deeply into the temple. Let me make a pause here and tell you something about the temple that we're visiting. I'm going to read to you something that I have here. The first temple, the Hekotomapidos, excuse my Greek, was west of the altar and dates back to the 8th century BC. So already we see that the first temple, and I think the temple is actually much older, was written at the time of Homer, which raises some eyebrows and questions because it means that the depiction of Hera is something that dates before Homer's time. So I read on. The time of the cult of civilization of Samos and one of the earliest of all Greek temples. Actually, this was probably the first Greek temple. It was constructed at 100 feet long before being replaced by a pseudo-dipteral temple, a temple with an inner range of columns surrounded by cella aramidet, built before the middle of the 6th century BC. The replacement of this temple led to the architects Rokos and Theodorus, rebuilding the site to the magnificent scale, starting the design of one of the earliest series of iconic temples. The altar was newly built on a much larger scale with an east-west axial orientation to the temple as opposed to the former southeastern orientation. The gated entrance to fortify the sacred precinct was built propping up the north wall, which was a double-aisle cella with a ring of columns as a later addition. The south wall was later being contributing to the beginning of many new smaller temples paving the sacred way. The most predominant topographical feature of the Temple of Hera, e.g., the smaller temples arose on the north of the sacred way. The archaic Heraion was in very close approximation to the 10 other temples, none of which had their own altar. This allows us to assume that the great altar of Hera served a multitude of temples. This is practically unheard of. You're going to see now on the right side that we're going to walk by what remains of smaller temples. And there you include, you see that there was a temple for Hermes and somebody else. And none of them had altars. Now, every Greek sanctuary or altar has a temple where you would bring a sacrifice of some animal normally, or bread or something. And then you would sacrifice this animal just before the altar, and then bring it up to the altar and then give it to the god or goddess. But this says a lot about Hera, who she was, because her temple was so large, massive, as we're about to see, really enormous, that we might be talking about a Hera which we've been sort of whitewashed to or hogwashed to. Let me explain that. So most of us are educated in Greek mythology, and we know about the 12 gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus, including Hera as the primary mother, and then also the 12 gods that proceeded from them. And I've been going deeply into that in the last few years because I offer trips to Anatolia, where we go into the Greek temples and the Roman temples, and also the Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. This is another story, a whole nother story. I mean, how often do you get to visit a temple which is maybe 12,800 years old? This puts what we're talking about now. This has all happened in the last 4,000 years. Okay, but let's leave that for now. And as a matter of fact, most of us are educated in the 12 Olympic gods, and also we are aware that there were gods pre-existing them, which we call the Titans. Okay, and basically there was a struggle between the Olympic gods and the Titans, and the Titans won out. But, and here's the big but, and this is the reason why this September on Samos was a complete eye-opener for me. There was a pre-existing classification or grouping of gods, and mostly goddesses. In fact, I would argue now, and I'll do that for you, only goddesses, okay, which are called Catonic. Okay, these Catonic classification of goddesses we're going to get into, but let me read to you something about what this means. The word Catonic is derived from the ancient Greek word katon, meaning earth or soil. It translates more directly to katonos, or, and this is in quotes, in, under, or beneath the earth, which can be differentiated from gi, which speaks to the living surface of the land of the earth. And this is then the Olympic gods. In Greek, Catonic is a descriptive word for things relating to the underworld and can be used in this context of the Chthonic gods, Chthonic rituals, Chthonic cults, and more. This is compared to the more commonly referred to Olympic gods and their associated rituals and cults. Olympic gods are understood to reference that which exists above the earth, particularly in the sky. Gods that are related to agriculture are also considered to have chthonic associations, as planting and growing takes place in part under the earth and, of course, over the earth. So, let me explain why this, to me, is so vital to our understanding of what unfolded 2,000 years before the Christian era. Okay. First of all, we know that the Mycenaeans and the Minoans were celebrating the Olympic gods maybe even 2,000 years before Christ and then 1,200 years before Homer, okay? Because they wrote hymns and performed theater pieces in veneration of many of the Olympic gods. But now going back to our Chthonic gods, who are they, and why can we say safely that the goddess Hera belongs fully to this grouping, okay? And that there was somebody pulled the wool over our eyes about 800 years ago to make us think differently. So first of all, when you go on the internet and start Googling Chthonic gods or goddesses, you come up with quite an odd list, including Hades, who is the god of the underworld. And I would remove Hades from this list immediately. Why? Because Hades doesn't have anything to do with agriculture. He stole the daughter of Demeter, he kidnapped her, as it were, Persephone, and took her down to the underworld. And then there was a deal made that she would come up half the year and serve the earth and be with her mother, and then half the year, and this is wintertime, she would be the bride or the wife of Hades. And so we cannot include Hades in this grouping because he has nothing to do directly with agriculture or fertility or pregnancy. Who can we include to this list then? And this is my list now. Clearly we can include Hera, because Hera's first expression or first form of veneration from the people was as a absolute primal maternal force, which has nothing to do with Zeus. In other words, she was venerated even here in this temple, in the first expression of the temple, because she was born under the willow tree here. So this is her birthplace. And she was venerated basically as a piece of wood, as a plank of wood, probably a tree, which was without any human markings at all. Just a piece of tree, maybe like a log. Who knows? We don't have that anymore. And a tree is symbolic of something that goes deeply into the earth with the root system and going also up into the sky with heaven, to the heavens. Now we're entering the inner court now. And now you can see how large this temple is. This is just the actual temple. And Hera, for the people, maybe even 2,000 years before Christ, was a vital goddess who we would worship because she would be taking care of nature, and there was nothing about her which was vengeful or jealous at all, not at all. So who else can we group in with Hera? And this is my experience now. Sibylla, of course. Sibylla was worshipped on the island of Samos and also on the island of Patmos, and all throughout Anatolia. Sibylla is one of the primary goddesses in Anatolia, spreading out through the Greek islands. Also, the Romans said, if we're going to have any safety in Rome, then we have to take Sibylla to Rome and build a temple for Sibylla in Rome, which they did, and also for Isis. So she was beloved not only by the Anatolia folk before the Greeks, and then she was adopted by the Greeks, the Hellenic Greeks, and then she was fully adopted also by the Romans, Sibylla. And she was basically a goddess which belongs also in the underworld, basically in caves. She was mostly at home. Where you find a cave in Anatolia or the Greek islands, you can be pretty much sure that they venerated the goddess Sibylla. And now there's other goddesses which belong fully to Anatolia, like the Magna Marta. The Magna Marta is a great mother in Latin. And she we know about from Catalahuk, which is one of the oldest cities in the world, in central Anatolia. And you see these incredible images of the Great Mother with thick thighs and a big belly, and actually giving birth. And she belongs fully to the Chthonic goddesses. And then there's Hecata. Hecata is a three-faced goddess who belongs to the underworld and also to any crossways, any places where paths cross, who is also the patron saint of witches and so forth. And Hecata was basically formless. She belonged fully she was at home in the underworld. If you go to her temple in Turkey today, Lagina, you can feel that power of her. And then as we move through time, then of course Artemis, the great Artemis of Ephesus, who is not to be confused with Diana from the Romans. The great Artemis of Ephesus was for the folk in her day, completely the Alpha and Omega, because she was a virgin and she protected the virgins, but she also protected the vineyards. She protected all the sources of water and all the seas and all the oceans. She protected fully the animal kingdom, and she also protected the heavenly kingdom, the heavenly realms. And Artemis was actually her temple in Ephesus, which you can see very little of it today, was actually one of the first world banks, because all the lands would come and put their money in the basement of the temple of Artemis, because they knew it would be safe, because people feared Artemis so much, which is also a paradox, because she wouldn't hurt a fly. And that's the Artemis of Ephesus. It has nothing to do with hunting, and nothing to do with revenge, nothing at all. I can't bring the two together personally. So I just listened to a podcast actually today from a rather brilliant scholar, and she argues that Artemis belongs to the Chthonic gods because of her darkness. When she revenges her mother, because this woman said, what are you for a mother? You only had 2 children, and I had 14. And then Artemis goes and with her bow and arrow kills the 7 daughters, and Apollo goes to the gym and kills the 7 brothers. And so this author, who I won't name because I respect her tremendously, says this is an example of this dark Chthonic energy of the goddesses. And so already now we have in the Chthonic belief system, we have a division here, a full division, because you might want to classify them according to their darkness and their involvement in sort of the deep recesses of the psyche. And then you have another classification which has to do with like Demeter, the great earth goddess, who we owe everything to for that we can plant and harvest. Okay, and when you talk about Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, or Aphrodite, the goddess of love and sexuality and purity, then you're not talking about darkness. You're talking about light. You're talking about a life-giving force. You're talking about a life-presenting force. And so this is where this is a rather rough talk, because this is all suddenly unfolding before my eyes. Is that there was this classification of Chthonic goddesses, all goddesses, I have to say. One more time, we can go through a Magna Marta, also going back to Göbekli Tepe, where they found a statue of a divine goddess over 10,000 years old. And also a statue of a woman giving birth in Göbekli Tepe. Okay? And then you go through the ages and you come to the Great Mother of Catalahuk, and then you start going into Sibylla, and then you go into other forms of the divine feminine as Hecate, and then Artemis. And you can't say that one preceded the other, but we sort of recognized them slowly over the course of time as they basically unfolded in our psyche. Now you're seeing the outer wall of this temple. Mind you, this temple was 108 meters long and 52.5 meters wide. Mammoth. It's just enormous. Why do you build a temple so big for a goddess who is supposedly jealous and wants to get revenge for all the misdoings of her husband? This is not logical. You do it because you know how vital she is to our well-being. Nothing for the primitives, what we call the primitives, they're actually very advanced. Nothing is more important than a female goddess for assuring that we'd have crops, for assuring that it would rain, for assuring that the soil would be rich and vital, for assuring that the animals would be healthy and strong, for assuring that the women would when they became pregnant, that the pregnancy would go well, and when they were about to give birth, that the child would come into the world without much pain. And even Artemis is supposed to deliver us into death without much pain. You see, this is what I'm getting at. The Chthonic goddesses were much more important to these people in Anatolia and the Greek islands than the gods were. Okay? And even if you go into the Jewish belief system, we know very well, it's in the Old Testament that in Solomon's temple, when you entered Solomon's temple, the first thing you would encounter was what's called the Ashada pole. It was a wooden pole centered in the first court of the Solomon's temple. So you would worship the divine feminine first, and then you would enter deeply into the temple of Solomon. They chopped it down. Yeah, they chopped it down. Yeah, I mean, Judaism had started to have problems with the feminine, and Christianity had more, and it's just been unfolding, even with the Greeks. That somehow we became allergic to the feminine, maybe because we had so much matriarchy filling Anatolia and the Greek islands that we said, let's try something else out. Now, this one column that you see there was actually remaining. Yeah. Interesting enough, this temple was built on marsh. This is partly why it's marsh is because there's a sacred river, Ambrasos, which flows behind there, which is the river that Hera used to bathe in, and she would then enter a courtship with Zeus there. And also it's right on the sea, right on the Mediterranean Sea. And some people say, why would you ever build a temple on a marsh where the ground is not so stable? One reason why you do it, because if you celebrate the birth and childhood of a goddess there, then you have to build a temple there anyway, okay? But there's another reason, and we know this from the Temple of Artemis in Selçuk. The Temple of Artemis in Selçuk is built on a marsh, and underneath it they laid sheep's wool and hay, and then built the temple on this bed of sheep's wool and hay. Why? Because this whole area is earthquake active. The whole area is. Always has been. Always will be. Because two plates come together there, and so what's a better buffer for a temple than to ride on a bed of hay or a swamp, with the hopes that when an earthquake comes, the whole temple would move as one piece, basically on a swing of a marsh or a swing of hay and straw. There are other explanations which I won't go into there. So let's go to the heart of this now. I have a beautiful dissertation here from a woman that I found on the internet. Her name is Catherine Lynch, and it was written for her Bachelor of Arts in Classic at Colorado College. in 2012, so about 10 years ago. And it is well worth reading if you share my passion. Now you can see how big those columns were. This is the base of the columns there. This is just the base of them. And what she describes it basically, let me read what she wrote. Through an analysis of archaeological and literary evidence, my thesis seeks to illustrate that the Greek goddess Hera underwent a process of domestication and re-mythologization that transformed her from a powerful fertility goddess into a muted sister wife of Zeus. Hera's transformation fit into a greater movement towards a pan-Hellenic mythology that is centered on the Olympian family. While there are conflicting views regarding the motivations behind the pan-Hellenic codification of mythology and its significance, I argue, this is in Kathleen, I argue that the Olympian deities gained supremacy at the expense of Chthonic earth deities like Hera, who suffered a loss of power in order to present less of a threat to Zeus's reign. Such a reduction of Hera Chthonic power explained her shallow but popular representation as a petty, revengeful, and wrathful goddess whose furious outbursts against her husband served as only a means of rebellion against the rise of the Olympian order that have been left to her. Okay, so she argues quite convincingly that there was a power play that took place. I think I just walked up on the altar and I was told to move down. Now I'm moving to the back. Now we move past the altar. I'm sorry, I didn't. That's the primary altar where, at least in the last incarnation of the temple, people would offer the animals there and then carry the meat further, carry the offering to the altar where we're about to go to. So this domestication of the goddess Hera, you can say that that's exactly what happened to Cybele, Hecate, Artemis, even Aphrodite, Demeter, Persephone, and so on and so on. That means that they had an original energy which may have been formless, like a tree, or even a gaseous entity. She even argues that when Apollo was given the oracle places like Delphi or Didma or Claros, that before then the priestess was in charge, because the priestess would receive the energy from the water source or the cave, which was a feminine source. It would enter her and then she would deliver the oracle. And then sort of Apollo said, no, I'm going to take this over now. Just like Hercules stole the tripod of Delphi to take it over. You see, this is a power play that went on. You know, and I thought this only happened in Christianity, but it happened even in the Pan-Hellenic thought. Now you see these beautiful columns, these capitals that remain from there. Now we're entering the altar place. This is the altar. This is sacred ground. This is absolutely sacred ground. If you go there now with this awareness, you realize that you're entering. And now I turn back and look at the whole temple. You're entering holy ground, absolutely holy ground, because there were 3 manifestations of the temple there over this period. And all of them were absolutely divine. This is where you would come and commune with Hera. You would bring her a gift and ask her to bless the crops, to bless the pregnant women, to bless the animals, to bless the waterways, to bless life as a complete fertility goddess. Yeah. And now I'm going to walk around to the back of it, and we're going to see that they actually reconstructed the original, the last manifestation of the temple as much as they could. And I can tell you that when I was there in early September, like I said, on my way to Patmos to teach this incredible course on the apocalypse inside of us as a healing method, I started to say, wait a minute, did I miss the boat somewhere? Did I miss the boat somewhere? And then when I changed my flights to fly back to Munich over Samos, and I went there again, I said, yeah, I missed the boat. And I got to go back there again and not ask for reconciliation with Hera, but to pay homage and my full respect to this divine goddess who has nothing to, or has very little to do with Mount Olympus. She belongs there. She has a place there, just like Demeter does. They're part of the 12 gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus, but they have a much stronger connection to a religious belief system, which is Catonic, fully Catonic, which was fully based on the divine feminine, 100% based on the divine feminine. Like I said, spread out through Anatolia. Now we're looking at the reconstruction of the temple. Actually, we're looking now at a basilicum that the Byzantines built inside of the altar, because the Byzantine Christianity said, okay, this is a place where they worship the goddess. Then let's build a basilicum, rather rough and for probably Maria. It fits. Some people find it offensive. I don't anymore. It's called recycling. It's called recycling. Recycling of energy. It happened everywhere. It happened fully on Patmos. And now we're walking back behind that now, and now, like I said, we're coming to a reconstruction of the last altar. The last altar there. And you can see that a lot of the carved stone is fully Hellenic Greek or even Roman. And it says said on that plaque, this is the altar of the Hera temple. And this would not be a temple you would come to venerate a revengeful, jealous wife. You can forget that. You can fully throw that out the window. That, as I said, is hogwash and whitewash. This temple was a place to celebrate one of the most powerful and early forms, even pre-Hellenic, and definitely pre-Roman, forms of the divine feminine as a fully creative, life-giving force without any darkness. So already now, I'm struggling now because I'm going into this Catonic belief system, and I'm reading from some camps some reports that these goddesses are all about darkness, and like Hecate, no doubt she's in charge of the underworld and she gives passage to the underworld. But you can see that in two ways. You can see that as also a way of befriending sort of subconscious structures or the darkness inside of us. But this whole play about revenge or killing of children, or that you read in Homer and Iliad, I'm sorry, but it's not my cup of tea. Maybe because I've been so involved in Christianity and this full repression of the divine feminine, and that's why I've made films in the last 3 years from the Gospel of Maria Magdalena, from the Gospel of Thomas, and the Gospel of Philip in German, I'm sorry to say. I'm not sorry to say, but if you speak German, you have free access to them on YouTube. And for me, this has been a great, great reconciliation because I realize that at the time of Christ, and certainly 2,000, 3,000 years before the birth of Christ, the primary energy throughout the Mediterranean basin, including Egypt, was primarily goddess-based. Even Isis in Egypt was the primary goddess, because her husband, brother Osiris, had already passed over and is going through the underworld. Okay, now we're leaving slowly the primary temple, and we're going to what they call when the Romans came and found this beautiful temple, they said, okay, this now it's ours. And they built actually neighborhoods around it. And I'm almost certain that the Hellenic Greeks would not have done that, because where a temple is, you would not necessarily build homes. This is not a place to live. This is a place to come and worship. But the Romans, they ticked a little bit different than the Greeks. And they said, this is a beautiful temple, and why don't we build homes here, and then we can visit it early in the morning without walking 6 kilometers. Now I'm having a little fun, as you see. And so they built a whole town there, which very little of it's remaining. I'm going to show you basically a villa where they have a beautiful mosaic of 2 dolphins. We're going to go into it now. 2 dolphin mosaics on the floor, because you could see that they lived in style. The Romans lived in style, mostly at the cost of Mother Nature and also of the animal kingdom, but that's the way it was, and that's the way it is. Okay. And we're going to slowly now move out of the temple and move through the Roman community there. You're going to take a left there. We'll walk past again these altars, these temples which had no altars, which is mind-blowing to me. I've never seen a temple in all of my journeys which had no altar. But again, that's a testimony to how powerful and predominant Hera was to the people, that there was no need to install in the 10 temples there altars, because Hera was so all-encompassing and all-powerful that her altar sufficed for the whole area, maybe for the whole island, which by itself is mind-boggling. You can see that I'm slowly moving out of the temple, because I was deeply, deeply moved by it this visit. And if you ever have the good fortune of visiting Samos, go there with an open mind. Go to this temple without a doubt, because I've been to many temples throughout Anatolia. And I intend to keep going to them because I lead groups there. And I love these temples because these forces these temples were built for, they're still to a large extent there, And now we're moving out under these trees, and then we're going to come slowly to the Roman, what remains of the Roman houses, and the beautiful mosaic. And I'll just give you an overview of what I've gone through now. As you can see, I'm somewhat emotional about this because I find this so important to our development, that we see actually what happened. Even if Homer, who was blind, dictated the Iliad and the Odyssey 800 years before Christ, it doesn't mean it's gospel. It means that maybe he had an agenda. I'm not speaking against Homer. Don't get me wrong. He wasn't alone. There was another great poet, Hesiodus. I say it wrong because this is all new to me. Who also wrote about the Greek Olympian gods and goddesses. But you have to see that there's always a power play. That means when there's an old order prevailing, like the Catonic order, and it's powerful and it's so worshipped by the people, then you have to convince them that there's another order which has even more validity and more truth, and that's the emergence of the Olympian gods, the 12 gods, which started to unfold even 2,000 years before Christ, and then became completely codified with Homer and others 800 years before Christ. And as I said, don't forget the first temple built here where we're at right now. Now you're looking at this mosaics, was built actually at the time of Homer, meaning that Hera pre-existed Homer without a doubt, because she was being celebrated long before Homer. What Homer served to do was to redefine Hera, as Kathleen so well describes in her thesis, as a vengeful and very human goddess. And even the celebration of a plank of wood or a pole of wood what happened was the early Greeks, when they got there, they said, wait a minute, this is not enough for us. We're going to carve in ears, we're going to carve in a nose, we'll carve in a mouth, and we'll carve in a body to transform the basically formless wood into a figure of the goddess. And then that was then transformed into sandstone, and then it was transformed into marble. Thank God, now we have these beautiful statues. But this is exactly that. You take a timeless and primordial force, and you start to humanize it to suit our needs. And then in doing that, you move away from the absolute truth of a goddess like Hera or Sibylla or Artemis or Hecate, because you're just putting veils upon veils and upon veils and upon veils on these goddesses to suit the Greek needs, to suit the Roman needs, and then behind all these veils is this primary force. And you have to take these veils away to get at it. And even now, if you have a desire to go into the Chthonic belief system, and I strongly recommend you do that, then do so with a grain of salt. Because you're going to find people who say, yeah, the goddess Artemis belongs to this group because she was so violent. And I say, yeah, okay, then you have another group of Chthonic goddesses which I don't even know about. Because the Chthonic goddesses like Hera, who are and Demeter and Aphrodite and Artemis and Sibylla and Dauc de Magna Marta, they were all life-serving goddesses, life-giving goddesses, life-supporting goddesses, which makes them incredible, and it makes them vital for our time, because our time now needs to fully re-embrace the divine feminine, because all the structures we have now are basically patriarchal, all of them. I'm not going to name names, but they all are, and it's time to do that. And that's part of my journey. Part of my path is to re-embrace the divine feminine, and going now deeply into the mystery of Hera, who I know now is something that is much greater than the Mount Olympus, much greater, much older, and much more powerful. And basically, she's just been, as Kathleen says, domesticated by us. That we can have her, that somehow she can be more edible for us, and that is a human trait, understandably. But then you have to ask ourselves, what are we missing if we do that? So we have to go back into the roots. Okay, now I'm going to the entrance or the exit. And you'll see two women in panic there. They're the ones who sold me my ticket because they smelled smoke. And when you smell smoke on Samos, especially late in the summer when everything is brittle and dried out because of the long heat, you immediately get on the phone and start notifying the fire department. And there was indeed a fire. But you can see how much the Samians hang together when a fire starts on the island, because they know how existential that is. And especially nice to see two women doing that, responding to danger. You can see them panicking. I drove later and I saw the fire, and they contained it rather quickly, quite impressively, actually. Yeah. As I said, if you get to Samos and you want to visit this site, I recommend you do so. But do a little research about it first, and I hope this video helped you, be it as rough as it is, help you better understand what happened then and what's happening now throughout the ages. And now we come to the beginning, where I'm going to look down the sacred way, this beautiful sacred way. And you can see those carved stones, which are probably 2,300 years old, maybe 2,400 years old. Massive carved stones, sometimes 1.5 meters by 1 meter long. Which brings you into a rendezvous with the great, great goddess Hera. Okay, take care, all my friends. Stay in peace, stay in love, stay in hope, and stay well. Thank you.